is Terry Bradshaw, quarterback, Pittsburgh Steelers.
It's 7:15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
This is baseball, Major League Baseball. And this is
ABC's Monday Night Baseball, live from Fenway Park in Boston, Massachusetts.
Looking. He's under the gun. He's tied. He throws. It is.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 30th, 2025 episode of the Past Star Prime podcast as we talk about the June 30th, 1975 issue of Sports Illustrated. And much like this year's U.S. Open, when J.J. Spaun came from out of nowhere to win the Open at Oakmont in spectacular fashion, the second PGA Tour win of his career, Lou Gramm on the cover of SI from half a century ago when he won the U.S. Open for one of his 6 tour wins. We'll have more on that coming up. But hey, guys, Mark and Bill here as always with me. Mark, you're in Maui as we record the show. How nice.
I know. I'm looking out at the ocean and the waves crashing against the rocks. Life is hard.
So you lose your house to a fire in January and you go, you know where there were also some great fires?
I know.
Let's head to Maui.
I'm not close to Lahaina. I am.
Yeah, I was just going to say, have you been anywhere near that?
No, I stay away from that part of the island because there's too congested. I like the area that we're in right now. We're near a town called Paia, it's like a little hippie town. It's really nice around here.
Billy, no fires from you, and you're about to get on a boat.
I am. Yep.
Where are you headed?
Tomorrow morning. Heading to Mexico.
Nice.
Yep.
Nice. So both of you on the water, and that's my question for you both. June 20th, 1975, Jaws is released. How did that movie affect you guys when it comes to swimming in the ocean?
Well, the first thing I want to say is to Bill, you better get a bigger boat for your cruise. You know, I never worried about sharks. I so remember that summer of 75. It was such a cultural phenomenon, Jaws. And I wanted to go see it so badly. And I remember I went with my sister to see it, which was interesting. I think it was the only time I went with just my sister to see Jaws. But there's a scene where they're diving. They find this boat and it's like just by itself in the water. And they go underneath, like Richard Dreyfuss's character goes underneath and dives and looks. And all of a sudden this head comes up and that like really shocked me. I was like, oh my God. But what was really great is I was in New York, was it last year? And I went to see a play called The Shark is Broken, which was written by Robert Shaw's son. And it's a one-act, 3-person play where it's conversations between Richard Dreyfuss, Roy Scheider, and Robert Shaw during breaks from filming. And it's I enjoyed it actually. And Robert Shaw's son looks just like his dad. I mean, oh my God, it's like spitting image. He looks like Clint, you know.
Does he sound like him?
Oh yeah, and he sounds like him too. And there's a picture. Robert Shaw died, like I want to say in 78, 79. He was only like around 50. And so his son was only like 4 years old when his dad died. He wasn't very, very old. So there's limited memories and stuff. Yeah. But he's a spitting image of his dad in this play.
I remember swimming in the Bahamas and it was nighttime and just like, you know, Jaws got in my head. So I was fine, whatever. But then we went out a little bit deep to where I was treading water and my foot hit some sort of live creature. I don't know, you know, just a little fish or whatever. And it just freaked me out. I was like, we got to get out. We got to get out of the water now. So
that man-eating guppy fish. You got to be careful.
I don't think anyone was ever the same after they saw Jaws when it came to being in the ocean.
Well, you know why Jaws was such a cultural phenomenon. Even Sports Illustrated does a movie talk on Jaws that was written by Rory Blount Jr. Yeah. So they even like.
Yeah. He didn't like it that much, actually.
Well, what does he know?
Right? He said, I remember loving both the book and the movie, but he says The Treasure of Sierra Madre is a better movie. That's
That's a
the
really
one,
good movie,
that's
Treasure of
the
the Sierra
one
Madre.
with the line, "We don't need no stinking badges."
It's
But
badges. We have no badges. We don't need no stinking badges, I think is how he actually says it.
yeah.
Mark, you got to sell that a little better.
Badges?
We don't need those
We-
stinking badges.
We have
but you
no
gotta get in.
badges. We have
Yes.
no badges.
You're not
We don't need
taking
no
that from
stinking
anybody.
badges.
Yes.
I'll say this: 50 years later, Jaws is a classic and part of our culture. For the Treasure of Sierra Madre, I have a buddy, Tony Reed, who lives in Sierra Madre. Other than that, I don't know anything about that movie.
It's a really
There's
good
a
movie.
treasure there.
It's made in 1948. Humphrey Bogart, Walter Huston, who I think got nominated or might even won an Oscar for it. But it's all about greed and how it changes the personalities of people. Humphrey Bogart was great in the movie because his character becomes very greedy, very neurotic.
I'll make another declaration that people can agree or disagree with, but you guys know I don't like Quentin Tarantino, and you've tried to change my mind on that. And another thing about movies, no movies before 1960 are worth watching.
You're so wrong. You're so wrong.
So boring.
Oh, Treasure of Sierra Madre, you'll enjoy. It's got shooting in it.
The
So
Wizard of Oz?
The Wizard of Oz is the one exception, but like Gone with the Wind, horrible. Citizen
oh my
Kane,
God.
horrible.
The Oxbow incident, 1941.
Anything. What's the Psycho guy? Any of those movies, horrible. Oh,
Anthony
Hopkins.
Perkins, that was 1960.
Perkins.
no, the guy who made the movie.
Oh, Alfred Hitchcock? I thought Rear Window was, I like Rear
I didn't
Window.
mind. When did Birds come out?
Like
what?
Birds, if they made a remake of that,
63,
that
1963.
could be awesome.
I didn't mind the Birds. That was all right. That scared me.
Oh, you got it. You,
That's
Scott,
right.
I am so disappointed. You know, I'm going to make you a list of movies.
That's
maybe
like me
next-
saying I think s'mores are overrated, and I would not eat a Cheez-It if I was dying of hunger. So
Why?
Very disappointed. I'm getting someone to compile
I don't eat cheese. So what
of
is
the
it against
best
cheese that you don't like?
movies prior to 1960 for you.
I like crackers and I like cheddar cheese. I do not like Cheez-Its.
You like wheat thins?
Love them.
So Scott, you would watch 1965's Billy the Kid versus Dracula over a classic movie from the 30s, 40s, or 50s.
I was being generous and giving you the 60s, but probably wouldn't watch anything in the 60s either.
The Graduate?
Oh, Graduate's so boring.
Okay, In the Heat of the Night.
In the Heat of the Night's a good movie.
Yes.
12 Angry Men's a
Kids?
good movie.
Cool Hand Luke.
Didn't like it.
Oh my God. Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde. I don't know.
Manchurian Candidate.
At some point, I just stopped. I was like, these are all horrible. They didn't know how to make movies until like Spielberg. Spielberg's probably the best one.
Well, Spielberg did Jaws.
Yep.
You know,
I
Scott,
also-
we've been doing this show for over a year. I've never seen Mark get as fired up
Oh yeah, you
over
pissed me off.
something like
You
that.
pissed me off because you don't know the movie.
Yeah. He's
But,
coming after you, buddy.
But when the movie came out, you know, I didn't know who Roy Scheider, I knew who Roy Scheider was from The French Connection. I didn't know who Robert Shaw or Richard Dreyfuss was. So I was trying to figure out which one of those characters was which. And I flipped them. I thought that the Richard Dreyfuss character or Richard Dreyfuss was Robert Shaw and vice versa. And boy, those two guys as different as you can get.
Absolutely. Well, and like you said, Shaw died a couple years later, and Richard Dreyfuss won an Academy Award a couple years later.
Yeah, well, Robert Shaw, he was in From Russia to Love with Sean Connery, he was a great Bond villain in that. They had a great fight on a train, and then he did another movie he was friends with Connery later. I think Shaw was a rugby player too. He was very athletic. How about was it the one at the Super Bowl? Was it Sunday Bloody Sunday or whatever it is? Where Shaw's actually running around at the real Super Bowl, shooting some scenes, which they never could do today. And The Deep, with another
Back
Benchley.
when Seth, that was very much worth it.
Yeah. Shaw
Right,
was
the underwater
and The
scenes are worth
Sting.
it alone.
Robert Shaw was in The Sting with Robert Redford and Paul Newman.
All right, people, that's our show for today. Thanks for listening.
It's all about movies. You thought
Yeah,
this was
right,
a
Pat?
sports talk. It's
Anything
about
you ever
movies.
wanted to know about Robert Shaw, who did, Mark just recounted his IMDb page.
Yep.
I'm not looking at it. It's all from my head.
Mark,
Yeah.
we're looking at you. You've got, I see IMDb right in front of you.
Right?
I am not. I
IMDb.
stick by my rep.
Let's move on, shall we? Or we can talk about the life and times of Orson Welles.
Don't get me
Scorecard.
started.
Mark, what do you got?
I don't know. I'm so flustered from this conversation. I don't know what to say. I've got the story of a jockey by the name of Robert L. Brand, who was 54 years old, which seems kind of old for a jockey. But anyway, he was like very injury prone, I guess. And he had the first race at Churchill Down, and he ended up finishing second in the race, but he broke 2 ribs. And, it's like this was par for the course for him. He always got hurt. But the funny thing was the name of the horse he was riding, Amazing Safety.
Right.
I guess not too safety.
No. I forgot the punchline. That was good. Billy.
Okay, it's about William R. Tronzo. He's a little league coach who one night decided to play the big Pennsylvania lottery. But he's got to coach a little league game. He didn't want to miss that. But it just, wasn't his lucky night. Because of rain, the game was called with his Beaver Falls team ahead 2-1.
Ah, man.
Yeah, exactly. So he has to go home and check the lottery. Not so bad. He won $1 million.
Wow.
So things turned out pretty good for William
I would say so.
R. Tronzo.
Yes. And they later finished that game, and his team won 6-4.
There you go. Exactly.
Just a great night all around.
It was
for him
for
and
old
the
Billy.
8-year-olds.
Yep. You're not going to miss it. You don't want these games called out because of rain. I thought in those days they played through thunder and lightning and everything else.
It was madness at Medina. Lou Graham and John Mahaffey go to a playoff to determine the winner of the 75 U.S. Open. Back then, a playoff meant another 18 rounds of golf on Monday. The two were both 3 over par after 72 holes. So after getting rid of Watson and Crenshaw, Irwin, Palmer, and of course Nicklaus, they went at it mano a mano on Monday. And in the end, Graham wins his only major by 2 strokes. So I thought it was interesting that we spoke, I think, last week about how Nicklaus said that he sometimes thinks majors are easier to win because half of the field comes into the tournament not thinking they can win. And this was just the opposite of that, right? All the big guys kind of folded up on Saturday and Sunday. In fact, on Saturday, Watson and Crenshaw, 25 and 23, paired together, the future of golf, and they made 1 birdie between the two of them. So,
well, I mean, that Medina course was so tough that Graham and Mahaffey, they were +3, and they played it, and they did that 18-hole playoff the next day. And I think they both won. I think Graham won the playoff because he shot even par. That's how tough the course was. But what people forget about Graham was, I think 2 years later in 77, he finished second at the U.S. Open, just 1 stroke behind Herbert Green. So he almost won 2 U.S. Opens, which would have been really impressive.
Well, I want to talk about Jack Nicklaus here. Jack Nicklaus finished at +5. But if you take away, let's just say that he pars his last 3 holes of the tournament, he wins the tournament at 2 under, but he bogeyed every hole, 16, 17, and 18 to finish at 5 over. So if you just can say, let's say he pars those holes, Jack Nicklaus wins for his first time at Medina.
wow.
And there's no playoff. But he bogeyed each and every one of those last 3 holes.
The other interesting thing that I wanted to go back to Graham was that, he was drafted in the U.S. Army. So I think he actually played golf for Army, but he served as a member of what they call the Old Guard, Company E. Yeah. And those were the ceremonial honor guards that guard the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier at Arlington National Cemetery. So interesting. So, but anyway, he played for the Army golf team and won some inter-service championship in 61. I guess that's where they played the other academies.
He's 87 years old, still alive, and from what I'm told, a nice older man. So,
but if you just go by, a lot of times these golfers on these magazines are not the guys. Yeah, you get a Lee Trevino and you'll get a Nicklaus, but a lot of these guys are usually, they're sort of one-hit wonders. because this was Lou Graham's only major win, and it was also John Mahaffey, who finished in second, only had one major win. He did win 16 times on tour, but only one major. So a lot of times these are the pinnacle of these guys' career back in the 70s.
Yeah, I'll never forget. I did a script for, I was doing something for a golf show, and I had to do a script for the U.S. Open. I forget what year it was. It was a long time ago, and the guy who won the Open that year was Michael Campbell. No one's ever heard of him
Exactly.
before or since.
But like
Well, it's
45
hard.
years from now, Scott, someone will do a show like this, so they'll go, hey, but we can get Campbell on.
Right, right.
Well, there's only 4 majors a year, so you don't have that many opportunities to win a major.
No,
Yeah.
but Scott, who was the guy you just mentioned that won the U.S. Open this past week?
J.J. Spawn.
But you never know what's going to happen with him. This could be his pinnacle, which I'm saying is a great pinnacle to be at. But
He's 35 years old, so it likely is.
Yeah. Yeah, what I'm saying, but to be able to say you did that is to have the rest of your life, but still it's these guys just sort of get to the top, and then they just sort of sink back into where they're supposed to be.
Everyone, including the writer Dan Jenkins, said that the course was playing easy, but that the golfers were just collectively awful over the 4 days. Maybe, as Mark said, Medina is never easy. So,
no,
because the scores did not reflect that. Let's move on. High, fast, and very upsetting. The track and field championships in Oregon, and keep in mind, we're just 1 month from the shocking death of an Oregon legend, Steve Prefontaine, but the meet went on as planned with two guys who ran a lot like Pre. Frank Shorter won the 10,000 meters, and pop guest from last month, Marty LaQuarrie, set a course record in the 5,000 meters, but Prefontaine remains on everyone's mind. Corny as it sounds, I thought about Pre with about 600 yards to go, LaQuarrie said. I think the crowd here is used to someone giving it everything and coming into the finish dead tired. If I used my usual strategy and waited until the last 150 to move, well, with the tradition here, I didn't want to do that. So Marty's running. Shorter, who we said was the last guy to see Prefontaine alive when Prefontaine drove him home. Both those guys running with a heavy heart and with Prefontaine on their mind.
The tough part of this is we talked to Marty LaQuarrie, and you see what he did before you guys read what he ate before he set the record for 5,000. A pre-meet lunch of peanut butter sandwich washed down by a glass of wine.
Yeah,
and you look at that. Those are the type of questions that sometimes you get later on in these issues.
Right.
And you're like, oh, that would have been an interesting one. What was the reason? PBJ and wine, not usually the gourmet's choice, I guess.
No.
Is it a shock that Marty said that he had a little bit of a stomachache after that?
Yeah, exactly.
We've talked a lot on this show about how big track and field was back in the 70s. I mean, it was on par with baseball, football, hoops, golf, tennis, boxing. And that's because of men like our next guest. There was a running boom in the 70s here in the States, around the world, to be honest. And that's partially because of Frank Shorter, two-time Olympic medalist, winning gold in 72, silver in 76 in the marathon, one of the greatest long-distance runners in U.S. history in the 10,000 meters as well. I'm telling you, these guys were rock stars 50 years ago. And Frank joins us now from out on the Cape in Falmouth, Massachusetts. Put the drums down, you rock star. We're going to get going here. How you doing today, Frank?
Doing very well. It's wonderful down here. We're not quite as hot as they are up in Boston, but we've still been managing the heat. But I also was 4 years in Florida training when I was training for the Olympics, because we train in groups. And you talk about that running boom. There were enclaves around the country. There was one in Boston with Bill Rogers and the other guys up there. And there was another one in Florida with a guy named Jack Batchelor. We all went down to train with. And I was used to the heat. So I'm used to it, but I could tell, just as I'm slowing down, my tolerance is not what it used to be. But that's part of what we were talking about before we went, on the air officially, is I told you that I have this idea of slowing down as slowly as possible, which I've been doing since I was about 35. And so, yeah, and how but ironically, I was ready for it because as I was improving and getting better when I was in Florida and out in New Mexico training at altitude, the goal was to see how good I could get. It wasn't that I wanted to be on the Olympic podium. It was really, I saw I was improving. Well, it was a similar attitude I've had for more years, more than half my life now, is, I just want to slow down as slowly as possible. And the goal is to get done with a week of working out and be able to say, I got pretty much everything I could out of myself this week. And so that's where I am now. But that same spirit, we were talking about Marty LaCoury, it's that same idea of just loving to run and wanting to just keep doing it for as long as you can.
Frank, we're talking about the June 30th, 1975 issue of SI in which you were competing in the AAU championships. You run away with the 10,000 meters, winning by half a lap. The race is in Eugene, Oregon, and it's not even a month since the death of your friend Steve Prefontaine. How emotional was this race? The ups, the downs? It must have had it all for you.
Well, it really did, because Steve died. I call him Steve. Everyone called him Pre, but we were good friends. We had met when he was a senior in high school before he went to Oregon, and I was a senior in college at Yale, and we made our first international team together and roomed together. So from 1969 through 1975, we were very good friends. And I also trained in a different way, since I was my own coach from the time I was in college, that I ran like a 5,000 meter runner. So Steve Prefontaine and I basically ran the same kind of workouts on the track. So we got to be very good friends. And I always maintain about the reason, I kind of joke about it, the reason he'd run with me is that he wouldn't do this kind of training with just anyone, very few people, because I shared the lead. And you pick up on that when, certain athletes can train together and get better together, and they really help each other. And when we were racing, we tried to beat each other's brains out. But when we were training, we realized we both got better together. So we had that connection, and we had it for many years. And he had put on this track meet in May before the track, the June the championships to which you're referring. And he put on this race in defiance of the Federation. That's another story about how we couldn't earn money from what we were doing. And so I went out to run in the meet. And he was supposed to run against Lasse Viren. He had invited the entire Finnish track team, and so our AAU Federation couldn't disqualify all the runners in the race, and they did because they had their hand in the money from every race that would go on in the U.S. Another story, and so they couldn't do that. But Lasse Viren, who was the Olympic 5 and 10,000 meter champion from 1972, had pulled out. So I'm in my kitchen, having just graduated from law school in Florida and moved out to Colorado, and I've done a hard workout on a Tuesday, and he calls up and he says, "Hey, can you come out to Eugene and run this race against me, because Lasse Viren is pulled out?" And so my response to him was, "Oh, so you need somebody to beat who can be at least close to you in the race?" And he said, yeah, that's it. And so I came out and we were close, but at least I finished, within the last straightaway of him. But then we went out for a party, and he took me to where I was staying at Kenny Moore's house, who was another Olympic marathon runner who we'd also trained with overseas. And that's where we talked about before. We talked about how we were going to work, towards opening up the sport to prize money. He drove around the corner and hit a rock going down the hill, was driven off the road, and he died. a minute after I said goodbye to him. So within a month after that, I went out again to Eugene to, run in the national championships. And again, it was as much a memorial run for him as it was for me to kind of be able to carry on. You carry on doing what you can do. And what I could do was go out and run, in his memory and keep the story going of why we had begun and why I'd been out there when he died in the first place.
So you said goodbye to him that night, expecting to see him the next day.
We were going to run 10 miles together. Yeah.
The next morning, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So how did you find out about it? And I guess the initial reaction would just be gut-wrenching.
Well, I was sleeping on the fold-out couch at Kenny Moore's house up on a butte, and he was going down from the butte, and there were very circuitous roads, windy roads going down, and he was driven off the road. We know that story. That was another buried fact, because we kind of know who drew him off the road, but it was a local well-known person who had connections. And anyway, and so Kenny came down and told me that he'd gotten a call, because this was before cell phones, and he got a call saying that they'd found him underneath his car. He'd been driven off the road and hit a block, and the car rolled over on him, and he suffocated. He had a car with a roll bar, and he went down, and his hands were behind his back, and he was pressed into the ground, and he suffocated because whoever ran him off the road didn't stop. And so that's how that happened. And for me, a lot of that, it took a long while. And again, we talk about coming back for that 1975 race in Eugene. I had survival guilt for quite a while. I mean, if we talk 10 seconds more, 10 seconds less before he took off, went around the corner.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously you're saying that what had happened and being driven off the road was sort of buried by officials, authorities in that town. I can't imagine the frustration and stuff like that. Do you think in today's day and age with all the social media and stuff that maybe things would have been different? The person that ran him off the road would have been...
Yeah, I know. And the interesting thing is that memory was always in Eugene. And again, I was at the World Track and Field Championships in Eugene about 2 years ago. And I took my wife, Michelle, up there because she hadn't been up there ever before to see where it happened and where Kenny Moore lived. And we went up to his house, and this guy came out. And the house is below the street. So we're on the street looking down at his house. And then the house had a view of the road where Steve was on. And this guy comes out, and he's very suspicious. Well, it turns out he's a journalist who always felt and for years investigated the death. And then when Kenny Moore's house came up for sale, this guy bought it. Oh. The journalist. And so that's how this undercurrent has been there for all these years in Eugene still. And so you get a hold of him, go up and see Kenny Moore's house and knock on the door. I forget his name, because again, I didn't want to intrude too much on that. For me, I've known enough, and I've dealt with it, but there's still a spirit there in Eugene that realizes, he's still there.
I mean, was it supposedly intentional, or was it just an accident and then they covered
it?
No,
the road was such that this person was speeding up the road, and it was a blind turn. He came on an ascent, making a right-hand turn around a huge boulder, and he was going so fast, he went from the right lane into the left lane, and Steve's car was coming down in the right-hand lane, but that road was right up against the mountain. So on Steve's right, he couldn't turn right to avoid him. He could only turn left to avoid this guy. And he hit, and again, you can't make this stuff up. It had a retaining wall, the road, but there was one spot in the retaining wall where was a huge boulder. Guess where his car hit? The huge boulder. And that's how he flipped. It was a confluence of terrible circumstances. Well, but anyway, that's what I was doing in 1975. Yeah.
Do you go and visit that memorial that's there nowadays? And how do you feel when you see it?
Well, I was there 2 years ago. I showed my wife, and again, I'm at the point in my life, I'm 77, almost 78, and where I believe things happen for a reason. So we're leaving that and walking up to go around the turn, and down the road on his normal loop, which goes right by that point, is John Anderson, who was a runner on the Olympic team in 1976 with 72, and he was from Eugene, and we happened to meet right there while I was showing my wife what was going on. So I just it was very, very emotional. It's still and I guess what makes me feel a little bit better is, again, his memory. He really accomplished so many things, and his memory really lives on. He was an icon. No one today could go to the University of Oregon or any university in the United States, and this was the second time he'd done this. He said, "I'm going to put on a track meet in our stadium." How many runners can do that? No one, before or since.
Tell me about, I mean, I heard about Prefontaine when I was a kid. Tell me about the man. Tell me what kind of guy was Steve?
He was very private. And again, I like to think that's why we kind of got along, is that I'm private and I don't have many close friends. And for instance, he had decided that because I'd had success running in altitude, he actually, a month before he died in early April, he came to New Mexico, to Colorado, and trained with me there. And we drove down to Taos Ski Valley in New Mexico, where my family had moved in the 60s. And we trained down there. And he was going to come the next year and train with me because he realized the 5,000 meters that he ran in 1972, I was one of the few people who could tell him he ran a dumb race. And he did. and he admitted that he took the lead in the last lap and ran in the second and third lane around and moved too early and got beaten at the end. And so he was going to come to train in New Mexico. That's why right before he died, he could call me up, because we just trained together 3 weeks before. And so, but he was very, very private. And that's, which I'm going to still, there's a lot, again, I'm not sort of, I'm telling you a lot, but there's a lot more. And he was doing things on the sly in Eugene that people didn't know about. He would do things behind the scenes and kind of arrange for certain things to go on to help certain people, help certain groups in Eugene, because he came from a very basic, poor background.
The crowd there, when you win this championship a month later, they gave you a really long ovation. It's almost like they were cheering on Prefontaine through you. I mentioned earlier, you guys were rock stars. He truly was like a rock star, especially in Oregon. Could you feel the fans? Like, could you feel that moment that they were cheering on you, but they were also, it was cathartic for them?
Oh, I think they were cheering more for him, and that was perfectly fine with me. That's the way it should be. Yeah, I said, yeah, that's why we're here, because we don't want to forget. And for me, I think it was emblematic. It was sort of my gesture is saying, I'm going to keep coming back for as long as I can to kind of try to keep this alive. And I think part of what we then went on to do, some of we runners, carry on the spirit of what that track meet was for. And it resulted. It took us 6 more years, but we opened up the sport to prize money. And it was the thing that we were trying to do. People could earn money outright. And that's another story, but that's one of the things we talked about on the night that he passed away. So
I mean, you know, his legacy lives on. I mean, think about it. Over 20 years after he passes, you not have one but 2 movies come out about his life in back-to-back years. One I know you were involved in, but
I was involved in both.
Oh, were you involved in both?
I
Okay.
was involved with both, and because I thought, you know, at first, there was the first production was with basically stimulated by Nike, and my relationship with Nike, I actually went under contract with Nike after Steve died, because he had been the first athlete to wear Nike shoes, and I became the second athlete to have an agreement under the table with Nike. But now they're not going to worry about that kind of stuff. But my relationship with them had fallen apart with Nike, but they came and asked me to help with the research. And I actually worked with the people writing the script and everything, the research on the first movie. And
that was Prefontaine with Jared Leto?
Yeah.
So then why did a year later they come up with a second one?
And the second one, because Kenny Moore, whose house we'd been sitting in front of and where I was staying, wrote the script for the second movie, and he actually played a role in the second movie. It was a Robert Towne movie. The same producer who produced Chinatown and that. And so I worked on that one as well. But my feeling, and I was the only person to work on both. You know, they wanted to have, the first time they wanted to do it exclusively, you know, the Nike production. And I said, no. When I started to help them, and then the next production came along, and then it became a race to see who could get it out first. I was the only person to do both because, and at the time I said, you know, if Steve is up in heaven looking down on this, I'm pretty sure that what's going to go through his mind is, what the blank are they doing? what the are they doing? And so I said, I'm going to go with both. And I did. And it's just, I got involved in the second one because of Kenny Moore having written the screenplay.
So you're actually in the second movie. You have a role in the second movie.
I was a character.
I
was a character, and I actually did the commentary of the races.
Okay.
We did in the voiceovers.
And in the second movie, they had an actor play you too, Jeremy Sisto.
Yes.
That must have been very weird.
No, it was okay. And I didn't care. I can't even remember how well he did or badly I think he did. You know, that didn't bother me. I mean, there were certain inaccuracies, like he actually, there's a story about how we ran the national championships for the first time that he and I met, and he supposedly had cut his foot. Well, what happened is he cut his foot in the swimming pool in the National Collegiate Championships the week before the National Track Federation Championships. The story, and we didn't run against each other, but the real story was that he was in a swimming pool, cut his foot. And the story in the movie was he was playing around with a lady and somehow cut his foot. And so I said, okay, I'm not going to worry about that kind of minutia. And, you can have a little, I don't know what the term would be, extrapolation of circumstances or whatever you want to do. It made it more romantic.
So which was the better movie then? Or I guess
Oh,
who
the
was better?
second movie was better.
And who was the better Prefontaine? Was it Jared Leto or was it Billy Crudup?
I think both were fine. It's just it was sort of the factual situation in the second movie was much closer to, well, it was a lot more factual.
So if Prefontaine was here today, what do you think he'd be doing? Would he be in movies?
No. I would think whatever he did, it would have a philanthropic bent to it. I think there was a quality in him that really did want to give back. He never. Part of his appeal was, I think that the whole state of Oregon realized he was not in it totally for himself and his notoriety, and was not meant, or he didn't want his notoriety to solely carry him to success somewhere else. I think there was a give back part of him that would have come out much more quickly than it normally does in people. Again, I like to think that he wasn't doing this to gain fame or fortune. He was doing this because I think he realized that, when you have this kind of recognition, there are ways to use it that are unique to you. And I think he had a wonderful instinct for it. I mean, that's why he could do this when he was in high school, and it wasn't intentional and it wasn't a plan. It was his character. I mean, he didn't really play a character. He was already his own character. I don't know if that's making any sense, but it was his core personality that never changed. And I think that's why he could just keep, I keep using the curves going up, but that's why he could keep going up, because people realized that his desires weren't personal to the extent of that's really why he was doing it. And I guess in modern terms, I don't think he was a narcissist. Because what he was doing behind the scenes that I know of, that's not what you do when you're a narcissist. You want everything that you're doing to be out there, and you want to get credit for everything that you're doing. And that's not the way he was.
Anytime we do a show, I think all of us, Scott, Mark, and I do a lot of background research on the person that we're talking about or what we're going to talk about with the person. I read a lot about Prefontaine. It always says the same thing. He's a hellraiser. He does what he wants to do. Why is there such a difference between that and what you're saying about him being such an introvert and a quiet guy? Because it seems like everything I read said the same thing about how he was a free spirit and he said what he wanted.
Well, he was a free spirit and he did say what he wanted. But again, that was part of his appeal, and I knew him in private. Obviously you do have your public persona and your private persona. It's just, like I said, I started rooming with him in 1969. So, I'd known him for 6 years already. And basically lived with him overseas when we would go on these tours with the U.S. track team, because we had to. I mean, part of it was we go on these tours and you had to go and run for the U.S. and they would pocket the money that they got for your appearing. And then they would allow you to go to some peripheral meets. One time we went to Norway, and it was he and I and one of the first Nike reps in a Saab 99 cruising around Norway, running in tiny meets, which we were allowed to do if we went overseas. And so that was, we lived through that, trying to earn money to get by so we could train in the year, because you couldn't earn it when you were really training back home. So, we went through all that. So you really did get to learn to deal with the private side. And that was the side I saw. I saw and so, yeah, I guess if you say, well, but I also think you're right. I think there was part of him that for whatever reason, he knew he could get away with it. And again, that I think was just natural instinct. He knew where the limit was. And if you think about it, he never went over the line. He could complain, but he never went over the line. And I don't remember him ever personally attacking anyone in public. And that was the other part. He could talk about the system, but he would leave certain individuals out. And that became very beneficial later on, after, when others of us, like Kenny Moore and I and my law partner, we drew up the trust fund concept. When we would present this to the Federation people, he hadn't insulted those people. And that's a big difference. And we always had a motto that, you don't talk about someone on a dais and then get down off and badmouth them and then come down off it and say, now let's talk about it. You don't do that. And I think he just had an ability to do that, and be a lot closer to the line, to the limit.
We are talking with one of the greatest long-distance runners in United States history, the legendary Frank Shorter, gold medalist in the 72 Olympics, in the marathon in Munich, of all places, where it just so happened Frank was born. You win the gold medal, Frank, but the ending of it's a little bit bizarre because of some nut job. Can you tell our listeners about the final moments of that race?
Well, I was approaching the stadium and I was ahead. I didn't know it at the point, but I was ahead by almost 2 minutes. And I heard a roar from within the stadium. And that Olympics in 1972 was the last time the marathon was held on the last day of track and field. So you would start the marathon at the beginning of that last day at the track meet, and then supposedly it would end, sort of the meet, when everything else was done. The marathon would finish. Well, I got outside the stadium and I heard this roar inside, and I was about 10, 15 seconds from going into a tunnel that would lead me down into the track. And this roar goes up, and I'm thinking, oh, okay, somebody, because certain field events like the high jump or pole vault, if they're going on, they can last a long time. And as people perform better and better, that's why they last a long time, keep making heights. And so I thought, oh, well, something's going on. So I turn down into the tunnel, go down the tunnel, and emerge onto the track thinking, well, I'm winning the marathon. There could be a roar here. And it's silent. I enter the track. It's silent. And you come in and you make a right-hand turn, and you're at the 100-meter start. And you make a right-hand turn and head to the finish line and do an entire lap. And then the marathon's over. So I start running down the straightaway, and still silent. And what I didn't know is that a young German student, I think, had a friend, and even after the massacre of the Israeli athletes and all the security that was so tight for the rest of the Olympics, this friend of this kid had been servicing the pop stands, the concession stands around the stadium for 2 weeks, and he drove a golf cart. And so all the security people had gotten used to this golf cart going around. So this fella, kid, gets a fake number and jumps on the back of the golf cart, and his timing is perfect. He's about a minute ahead of me on the service road that they let him in on. And his buddy is on the back, this kid, and he jumps off right at the tunnel and runs right down into the tunnel onto the track. And then he starts around the track. And what happened was I came down and he was just far enough ahead that when I came down and made the right-hand turn towards the finish line, he was ending the end of the far straightaway at the 200-meter mark. So I looked right. I didn't look out here, and I didn't see him. And so I'm still running, and I don't see him, and he's running behind. And I get to the finish line, and I start to hear whistles. And whistling in Europe is booing. So I'm thinking, okay, and the thought that went through my head, it was kind of a bizarre thought, was, geez, I'm an American, but give me a break. I'm running.
They booing me.
I'm running. And so I start running down the back straightaway, and he's come around and he's already on the finish line. And so I still can't see him. And someone, this great Midwestern accent in the stands, because it's silent or they're whistling. And he says, "Don't worry, Frank." And I thought to myself, why should I worry? I'm winning. and so I got around, and when I finally came off the last turn, I saw something going on at the finish line. And then I realized that's not normal. There are a whole bunch of people out on the track. So I ran through and the finish line, and just sort of, I'm starting to walk, and someone comes up and says, "What do you think of that guy?" And then I realized, I knew right away what had gone on. I knew this young person had come in and run ahead of me on the track. But when I talked before about the reason, you run and you want to see if you're going to get better, I can honestly say that even from that moment on, it never bothered me. It wasn't like, oh, I've been robbed, or it was, oh, okay. And so for me, that's reinforcement that I can realize I didn't run for the cheer. That's not why I ran. In a way, I didn't even run to win the race. I ran to see how well I could do. And the net result was I won the race. And I think that's a characteristic it's overlooked a lot, because again, you said you talked about Marty LaCourie before. A lot of this is timing, and I defy you to introduce me to a clean athlete who will not admit to having won less, lost more than they've won.
I remember I was 12 years old at the time, and I was watching that marathon. I watched the marathon, and I remember seeing the other runner in the stadium. What the heck? At least everyone in the crowd knew this wasn't.
Yeah, they began to realize.
Yes.
They said,
Yes.
No,
it's you. And I also remember, I think
I
it was
like to think
morning.
I like to think it's because they saw his running form and said, no. So yeah, you have a certain body type.
Right, exactly. And it was, like you mentioned, it was Sunday morning, I believe, the very last event before the closing ceremonies, which was different. But I want to bring back, and you mentioned this in that, the fact that you ran that marathon wasn't a given because of what had happened a few days earlier. As an athlete there in Munich, and when the terrorists took over that building and the Israeli athletes were killed, what was the feeling like as an athlete there, and then the decision to go on with the games?
At first, our reaction was, we're going home. People died.
Right.
It was. And I can remember we were all in a group, Steve and Kenny Moore and Dave Waddle, who was my roommate, all these Olympic names. And we had, from our balcony, we could see during the hostage thing, we could see the Israeli quarters. And then when we found out, and the other thing about Steve was that he was fluent in German. His mother was German. So his name was Prefontaine, but he was fluent in German. So when they started to broadcast about what had gone on, he could translate on the TV. We had a little portable TV. And so our initial reaction was, okay, well, that's it. We're going home. And then, you know, after the shock and the memorial service, we really realized that no, you can't do that. Because if you do, then they win. The terrorists win. And I actually told Kenny Moore on the walk back from there, I said, you know, the only other place from that service you could walk back, it was only half a mile through the Olympic Village to where we were staying, from the stadium to the Olympic Village. And I said, the only other place they can do anything here is out on the marathon course. And I said, I'm not going to think about it, because if they do, if I do, they win. And I ran the whole race, never thought about it. Never thought about it. And then after the race, and I have to tell again another Prefontaine story, and it was Kenny Moore's favorite story about the race. And Kenny finished fourth, and we're walking off the track, and Steve had come down, and he was actually right at that area where you walk off the track and go to the drug testing. Of course, he found his way down there for us. Don't ask me how he got there. And he's down there. He comes up, and he goes up to Kenny. He's walking with Kenny. He says, Kenny, God, you know, what a great performance. Yeah, you finished fourth, but think of, you know, all the people that you finished ahead of, and you know, this is fourth in the world on this day. And Steve had run the 5,000 meters, you know, earlier before we got in. And so Kenny asked him and how he finished, and Steve's words were effing fourth. So again, just a little bit different personalities.
So with everything that went on, what was it like to be on that podium and hear the anthem and accept that medal?
Pride, because, you know, because the distance, America until that point had, I think, been viewed not as a distance running country, but as a sprinting nation. You know, that's where we were dominant. And even though, you know, Bob Schul and Billy Mills in 1964, you know, had run very well in the Olympics, we weren't viewed as endurance athletes. And I was proud of the fact that, well, no, you know, we can do this kind of stuff. And you know, I was proud of that. And to just sort of continue, you know, people say, well, then what were you also thinking? And what I was thinking was, okay, now what do I do? Because, you know, I'd reached that goal. And I was just thinking, okay, where do I go from here? And because at that time, again, you couldn't earn money unless you retired and started to do endorsements, and which Mark Spitz, you know, did. And in his defense, he was very reluctant to do that. He was really pressured from above, and to do all that. And I just didn't want to do that. And part of that was based on, I was in the Olympic Village office of the U.S. Olympic Committee right after the massacre. And I was there stealing posters, which we were promised but had never been given. They had a lot of posters there, and I was stealing posters for my entire room. And they brought Mark Spitz in because they were trying to figure out how to get him out of Dodge. how to get him out of Munich. And I remember seeing that and just standing back from it, and I said to myself, no. I would not ever want to be there in that sort of circumstance. And so my decision became keep doing what I'm doing, let it settle in. So I went back and finished law school.
So, and speaking of law school, so you get your law degree at Yale, but then you had to
No, I got undergrad at Yale and my law degree in Florida while I was training. I trained for 72 in Florida, ran 20 miles a day, and went to law school full time while I was training.
Damn.
for 76. No, yeah.
But then didn't you head to New Mexico to become a doctor of medicine?
Yeah, for a little while, and then they wouldn't let me change my schedule to get enough sleep. So I said, no.
You've been a lawyer and a doctor. So we do a trivia question here segment on the show. It's called 50-50. I'm going to ask you a trivia question from 50 plus or around 50 years ago. True or false, A or B, very easy. Had a 50% chance of getting it right. And we talked about this a little bit, the two Prefontaine movies. So true or false, and I know you'll know the answer to this. The second movie, Without Limits, was produced by Tom Cruise. True or false?
False.
True.
Oh my goodness.
Tom Cruise produced that Without Limits movie, his company, with that had Billy Crudup playing Steve, and you having a role in the movie, and Jeremy Sisko playing you in the movie.
And you're right, because
it was
Robert Towne was the director.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
You know, Steve, can I have one thing? You said you're going to be 78.
Yeah.
Frank, excuse me, Frank. You said you're going to be 78. You look 25 years younger than that. You look absolutely amazing. And then you said you're slowing down. Can you tell me, and maybe you don't do it, what is your mile time today? If you
no.
Okay. No?
I'm not even gonna.
Okay. It's probably still better than mine.
No, okay. But it used to be at a certain point when I was in my 60s, I got to a certain point where my way to describe it was I'm half-assed fast as I used to be for the mile.
Great answer.
And so when I finally hit 9 minutes for the mile or something like that, I said, no, I'm half-assed fast. And that was a long time ago. And so I really don't know, because, and that's another story about how you can continue, because this is something that Billy Rogers and Amby Burfoot, who won the Boston Marathon and was a great editor at running magazines, and I had in common. We realized about 2 years ago, we were having dinner with George Hirsch, who was the publisher of Runner's World magazine and is still the chairman of the board of the New York Roadrunners Club, and he's 90.
Wow.
Dang.
Yeah, he wins his age group. He's running better than I am. But we all realized, Amby said, well, I'm going to run the Boston Marathon this year. I think he was 77 at the time. And he said, but I'm going to jog walk. And I sort of said, well, I jog walk too now. And then Bill raises his hand and says, oh yeah, I jog walk too. So we all, have transitioned as we're getting slower, to where and there's there's nothing wrong with that. And it helps keep us moving. But that's why the mile time, they don't make any sense anymore, because you don't even run for a mile, because when you're jog walking, then you can be out there for longer doing what you want to do. So again, you get to this point and it's okay not to want to know.
All I know is if I keep running or jog walking, I can live to 100. There you go.
That's the goal.
Who knows?
Exactly.
Who knows?
You look great, Frank. You look great.
Well, thanks.
Picking up on what Bill said there, you once said, Frank, quote, you don't run 26 miles at 5 minutes a mile on good looks and a secret recipe. But in your case, Frank, doesn't hurt to have those good looks. I hope your feet look as good as your face
No.
does.
Oh, that's another story. Okay. My feet, I've been taping my feet with pads since I was in high school. I was born with terrible feet. And when I was in my, I was still trying to run well in my mid-50s, and I'd linked up with a series called the Rock and Roll Marathon Series. And I would go to a lot of the races. And at one of them, there was a medical director for all their races that would travel from New York. And he had a booth, and I told him I was having trouble with my back. And I've had a lot of trouble with my back. And so he said, well, I can get a, therapist to come and do some work on you here tomorrow. So come tomorrow. And I did, and he had a little table, massage table, examining table on the back behind a curtain. And I got on the table. He closed the curtain. I had my shorts on, nothing else. The curtain opens, and in walks the therapist. And she looked at me from my head, my eyes on down, and she got down and looked at my feet. And out of her mouth came, I swear, "Holy Mother of God." That actually happened. So, but I think maybe having to compensate for that, I ran light on my feet. I did.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I really, when people would look, and even the tests, I was very light on my feet. So maybe it was just learning to deal with that. Yeah.
Better than her looking at your face and saying, "Holy Mother of God." So
That's right.
Hey, Frank, we've really enjoyed this. This has been
Great.
just great. July 5th, 1976, you were on the cover of SI. So we'll book you now. We'll talk to you again next summer. Sound good?
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Only American to ever win an Olympic medal in the marathon twice, gold in 72 and a silver with an asterisk in 1976. We'll talk about that next time.
Oh, yeah.
With the great,
Oh, yeah.
with the great Frank Shorter. Thanks for stopping by, Frank. Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Thank you, Frank.
guys.
You own it, Frank. Thank you.
Okay, let's stay with running, but turn our attention to baseball and stealing bases. It's a game of pinches. This is on the fast guys. Chicks may dig the long ball, but in baseball, they also enjoy speed, and the AL West had plenty of it. Billy, you talk often about the Angels when you were a kid, Ryan and Tanana, and not much else. But in 75, a guy by the name of Mickey Rivers is running wild in Anaheim.
Yeah, 70 stolen bases because the Angels had 220 that year. And Jerry Remy backed that up with 34. The Angels were a running team back in the day. They actually were a running team back through the 80s and somewhat into back in the 80s, 90s, and a little bit into the 2000s. It's only been recent where they just all of a sudden don't want to take the extra base. But, back in the day, man, Mickey Rivers, Jerry Remy just knew how to take the extra base. But, once you get good with the Angels, you got to be dealt. So they made sure to do that.
Yeah, they got rid of both those guys pretty quick.
And Ed Figueroa, which worked out well. So,
well, that year in 1975, I think there were 5 guys that stole 50 or more bases. I think Lopes had 77, Rivers 70, Morgan. People forget,
yeah.
They think of the Big Red Machine and Joe Morgan. You don't realize the speed he had. He had 67 steals. Claudio Washington had 40, but there was someone else that had 56, and was it Cedeno at 50? So there were there were a lot of guys running that year.
It was definitely they had to basically reinvent the stolen base rule because they stopped running,
Wow.
But it was a huge part of the game. I love the attitude of Oakland's Billy North. He led the AL in steals in 1974, and when asked about stealing bases, he said, "I do not steal bases. Reggie Jackson steals bases. That Kansas City catcher, Healy, he steals bases. With them, it's a surprise when they go. With me, everybody in the park knows I'll be running, so I'm not stealing anything. I'm taking something. He paused and
great.
said, I am a base taker, not a
There
base
you go.
stealer. So I think that's just, I've never heard anyone take it that way, but
Yeah.
he's right. You know, the Vince Colemans and the Tim Raines and, of course, the Ricky Hendersons. What people knew, like Dave Roberts in the World Series. They knew he was going, you know.
Right. Do you
Who
know?
led the A's in stolen bases back in the 75 season?
I think it was Clydell Washington.
Yes. And who was third on the A's? This would be a tough one. They mention him in the article, so it's
Del Bando?
Might have been Reggie.
Dan Hopkins.
Oh yeah,
Of course.
the new Herb Washington.
Yes. Yes. He played two seasons, finished with 21 steals.
So, Billy North was known as a speed guy, but he did play 11 years in the majors. How many homers did you think he hit in 11 years, and how many steals did he get in 11 years?
Well,
16 home runs.
What?
I looked up the
16.
steals, and he had about 400.
Yeah.
Right, 395 steals in his 11 years.
And
How many
I
homers
think,
did he have in
his
his 11
career high in home runs was 5.
So I'm gonna say 22.
Very close. 20 homers in his career.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, Scott, you had mentioned, I just wanted to add that Jack McKeon talked about what you said about stolen bases nowadays, but back in the day, he says, speed has become increasingly important in basketball. Hockey looks for fast skaters. Speed has opened up all these other games, and it's opening up our game for us. Not anymore.
Not anymore.
Well, coming back a little bit.
Back then, you stole second base. Very rarely, we talked about Lou Brock when he set the record. He rarely stole third base. Ricky was first guy to really bring in stealing third. And to me, it looks like stealing third is easier. You have to be, it's more based on just sheer speed.
And I always loved stolen bases as a kid. I enjoyed watching the Cardinals back in the 80s. I liked watching Lou Brock. I loved guys that just could do it, man. When Ricky played back when I was in the 80s, that man, you knew when he was on first, like you said, he was going to be on third. I love that aspect of the game that they took away. That was part when the Angels won the series in 2002. They had the Figgins and the Ecksteins that could do those things. So
Right.
I thought speed was such a key part of baseball. Now it's just home runs and walks, strikeouts.
Next one is called I Want to Carry My Load. This is on Art Williams. Who is that, you ask? The first black umpire in the National League, umped for 6 seasons from 72 to 77. MLB fired him after that season. Williams thought it was because of racism. I think he said something about they were going to bring up Eric Gray, and they didn't want to have 2 black umpires at the same time. He never got, unfortunately, his day in court because in, I think it was 1978, he had a seizure, went into a coma, and died 6 weeks later at the age of 45 years old.
Right.
But,
He was driving a bus in Bakersfield when he had the seizure, and then he went brain surgery. Was in the coma for 6 weeks and died. And he wasn't even 45. He was like shy of his 45th birthday.
Tragic. It's tough. These umpires. We all say, "Oh my God, they're horrible," and blah blah. I don't have good eyes. I feel so bad oftentimes for these umpires. It is not easy, and the athlete today is just so much bigger, stronger, faster. It's a thankless job, that's for sure. They talk of a play that involved Tim Foley, who we spoke of a couple weeks back, and it just shows you how hard the job is. He ruled a guy safe at first, didn't see that the ball had come loose. People start screaming at him. Coach Walt Riniak bumps him. Williams bumps him back. It was a mess. But he started as a player, as most umpires do. And what organization was he in, guys?
The Detroit Tigers.
Oh my golly. Aren't they all? Don't they? Everyone play there?
At some point.
It's one of the oldest franchises in baseball history.
Yeah. Speaking of the agony and the x-rays, Woody Fryman is a left-handed pitcher with the Expos, but he has an arthritic elbow, and yet he's won 6 games, would finish the season 9-12 with an ERA of 3.32. It's wild looking, says Dr. Bob Broderick, the Expo physician. From a lateral view on the x-ray, the arthritis looks like somebody's necktie. There's a lot of degenerative arthritis in there and loose bodies, a tremendous number of them all over the joint. You wonder how he can flex it. It's incredible that he can pitch with it. So, this was back in the day when, does your arm hurt? Yeah. But that
Right.
was how they made a living. It really was making a living. These guys weren't getting rich, not yet. And what the heck else was Woody Fryman going to do? He knew how to pitch, and he did. He pitched for a long time. Pitched till he was 43 years old.
Well, that's what Farman said, though. He said if he could do any other job and he would do it. But pitching is what he knew and what paid him at least a bit more than the other things he could do.
Yeah, I mean, in today's day, they probably would have had him do TJ surgery. But, and the following year in 76, Fryman made the All-Star team. So,
didn't he throw some no-hitters as well, Mark? Was that wrong? One?
he might have. I remember him initially with the Phillies. That's my first memories of Woody Fryman. And then he was with the Tigers from 72 to 74. He may have thrown a no-hitter. I'm trying to remember now, off the top of my head.
I just love how when they asked him about his arthritis, he goes, "I just grit my teeth and well, it's miserable. Really, in games, I can more or less block it out. I've pitched with a knot in my arm as big as a tennis ball with pus in it where it's swollen. I've had it so bad I couldn't even comb the back of my head or tie my tie." And he's still going out and throwing a ball.
Yeah, right.
Well, there was probably a lot of pitchers in the old days of baseball in the 20s and 30s who felt like, but you didn't do surgery. There was no surgery. You just went out and threw.
Right. Woody Fryman never threw a one-hitter, but how about this? 1966 against the Mets. Ron Hunt gets a hit to lead off the game. He's caught stealing, and he retired the next 26.
Whew.
So one hitter, and he faced the minimum.
Damn. A good pitcher.
Yeah. Elsewhere, Fred Lynn is on the cover of SI next week as the Red Sox rookie is having a season to remember. And in Detroit, Mark, he had quite a game.
Well, as most people did against the Tigers in 1975, Lynn had he had 3 homers in the game, a triple, a single. He became the second rookie ever to get 10 RBIs in a game. And the Sox beat the Tigers 15-1.
Yeah, I saw Fred Lynn tweet a couple days ago when it was the actual 50-year anniversary of this happening, and it was such a blowout that he said half of my teammates were in a bar down the street watching me hit my 3rd home run.
Must have made the Tigers feel good.
But that's when I started liking the Tigers, was back in those 74, 75, 76 years.
Well, you and Mark were 2 of the only ones.
Yes.
Hey.
Chacon was from Hunger. This is about boxing legend Bobby Chacon, who likes hot dogs and root beer. But that's not a good combination for a featherweight boxer. 2 weeks before his fight with Ruben Oliveras, Chacon was 140 pounds. That's 14 more than you're allowed to be if you're fighting as a featherweight. 3 days before the fight, he still needed to drop 6 pounds. He was basically starving himself to make weight, which he did. He got down to 124.5 pounds. My God, he looks like a survivor of the Baton Death March, said Jack Dizzy, a forum publicity man. So, usually when guys have to make weight, you hear about them being like, oh, he's, 130 pounds. He's got to drop 4 pounds or something like that. 14 pounds in 2 weeks is insane.
Yeah, and what they said for breakfast, he was having 2 poached eggs and dry toast. That's what his manager and brother-in-law said. So we took away the toast. Then we took away the eggs. And then they'd said that Chacon would head to the steam rooms, and each night an attendant would beat Chacon with a whip of eucalyptus leaves to open the pores. Then he would turn up the heat. My God. They said, the attendant said, "I've lost 16 pounds since I met the guy."
That's what I did in wrestling, man. Roll yourself up in mats. You'd blow hot fans on yourself. You'd starve yourself until weigh-ins. I knew one guy on our team who would throw up before he did the weigh-ins to lose as much weight. Disgusting. And maybe, Chacon was going to the Christian Bale school of acting for boxers because, Bale would drop all this weight. I mean, when he first did the Batman movies, right before he did the Batman movies, he did a movie called The Mechanic, where he was like 120 pounds. I mean, he looked like a skeleton. And then he does Batman, where he's all jacked up, like, months later.
So I wonder how that affects your body, though, because
it messes it up. I think in an
mean,
interview he said later he can't do that. Like in his 40s, he can't do in his 40s what he could do in his 20s. Or
De Niro was famous for that, right?
Right. Raging Bull.
How was your wrestling career?
Not good. I didn't like to wrestle, so but
Okay.
it got me in great shape. It changed my life in the sense
bet.
that I went from a kid that could barely run a mile and a half to a guy who could breeze. So my cardio just did a. If I hadn't wrestled, maybe I would never have cardio the rest of my life. I don't know.
Well, here's your wrestling joke for you. What do
Okay.
you call a guy with no arms and no legs laying on the ground? Matt.
Matt.
Yeah.
That's a dad joke. I'm going to go down and tell Caitlin that right now.
Yeah, don't laugh there, Scott. I know you're laughing
I
inside.
did laugh.
You
I'm going to get
bastard.
some eye rolls for that one.
Okay.
Thank you.
The fight started in Chacon. That I think he was the champ. Had no strength. He went down 3 times, and they stopped the fight. I had nothing. My legs were gone. I was awful. He said. Then he looked up and grinned, but I guess everyone could see that, couldn't they? So they basically starved him for 2 weeks to make the weight. Had a huge crowd, almost 20,000 people at the Forum, sellout crowd. He's from LA, Bobby Chacon. And but he had no strength. I mean, literally.
How can they let that fight go on?
It was different.
You know, a
back then.
guy
You let the
looks
fights go.
emaciated when he's out there. Isn't that like a health hazard nowadays?
I mean, they're featherweights, so you know they're going to be light guys. But yeah, I don't know. I think rather than say you got to make weight by X date. How about you've got to make this weight by this date and by like you can't, like, if you're 14 pounds overweight 2 weeks before the fight and you do make weight, you've done something drastic that has put you in. He could have been killed.
That's what I'm saying. It seems like a
fight at least. So
health hazard here.
Yeah. Hey, for the record, Bill, why don't you start us off there?
Sure. There's a guy, UCLA guy. Mark knows these guys. Billy Martin. Obviously, manager of the Rangers, which we all know.
Tennis coach.
What's that? Yes, tennis coach. He's the second freshman to win the NCAA singles title. The first to do it, Jimmy Connors. UCLA also won the team championship in tennis. Yeah, and he did face, Billy Martin did face Jimmy Connors twice in 75, and he lost in straight sets both times. And like you said, Mark, coach of the UCLA tennis team.
Famous coach of the UCLA tennis team.
We got to talk to that guy.
He's been the coach of the Bruins since '94. He's guided them to 14 straight top 5 finishes, 9 consecutive 20-win seasons. Something about UCLA and legendary coaches, man.
There's a guy I used to talk to who lived up the block from me who played tennis for Billy Martin at UCLA, and then he passed away. At a young age. He wasn't that old of a guy, too. He just had health issues.
And that's the saddest thing I've ever heard. All right, you just brought the whole show.
Yeah, Mark, where are you going with this, buddy? We're talking about a guy that's winning championships. You've got a dead friend.
What was that song?
And that's the show for tonight.
What's that song? Don't make. Oh, there's a song about "Don't Get Me Down."
Yeah,
it was in the '70s. Yeah.
I thought it was the
Okay, well,
ELO, right?
Yeah, that's right. Don't break me down. Whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah. Woohoo. Yeah, there you go.
I tell
you about
once more.
And you say I'm depressing, man. That singing would depress a lot of people.
Yes, it did.
Well, Scott and I just made people laugh, so now they're not crying hearing about your dead friend.
Yeah. I'll wait till you get to my story.
Oh, yeah.
All right, go. Bring us down again.
I'm going to talk about this horse that was ridden by our past guest, Jacinto Vasquez, who completed her sweep of the Phillies Triple Crown. And that horse was Ruffian. And this was just very shortly before her tragic passing in that match race. But yeah, she was she won the Phillies Triple Crown.
I thought Mike Schmidt did that.
Oh,
he did. Right after Ruffian.
I got one. Pele was our topic last week when he was on the cover of SI. In his second week with the Cosmos in a game in Boston, the fans were so excited to see the Brazilian superstar, they rushed onto the field, knocking Pele to the ground. He suffered a pulled knee muscle and sprained ankle. So soccer fans, in a word, they're nuts.
Yeah.
Faces in the crowd. Billy.
Okay, Stuart Thornburg, at 14 years old in this issue, he set 3 national weightlifting records. Then when he got to be 17, and he weighed only 123 pounds, mind you, he clean and jerked 275 pounds and won the senior national weightlifting championships. That's a lot of
And
weight.
how old?
He was
How old?
17. In the
Wow.
issue, he's 14. But I just brought him up 3 years later as well to show that he kept pumping iron.
Though he has a very interesting look on that faces of the crowd. It's like
Yeah.
he's puckering his mouth and he's got like a sort of smile. It's kind of a
But maybe
joke
he's
kind of
grabbed, maybe
smile.
they got one of those live action ones where he's starting to get the weight in his hand or something. So he's sort
Yeah.
of
Oh yeah,
puckered.
maybe. Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe
So
that's
sort of a
his,
live action
that's
type
his
thing.
weightlifting face.
Yeah.
Now we're going to go from our UCLA guy, Mark, and we're going to talk about an SC guy.
Yep. Steve Kemp, who's a junior All-American at USC. He batted .435 that year, bettering the school record by 31 points. He also tied the Trojan mark for triples with 8, led the team in homers with 13, RBI 67, runs 53, and he had a nice little Major League Baseball career. Picked by the Tigers, first pick at that time they I guess had a supplemental draft. This was in January of '76, and played for the Tigers, then with the White Sox, the Yankees, Rangers, and the Pirates. 11 seasons, 130 homers for Steve Kemp. Now here's a little trivia about Steve Kemp. The subject of his trade from the Tigers to the White Sox for Chet Lemon was used in a Magnum PI episode.
Oh, wow.
It was called Double Jeopardy. It aired on February 25th, 1982. And one of the characters who played a police lieutenant talks to Magnum and says, "Can you believe the Tigers traded Steve Kemp for Chet Lemon?" So that was actually in the script.
Wow. So we're talking about they can't believe Steve Kemp got traded. They can't believe Jay Buhner got traded.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Everyone's
And
pissed
make sure
off.
Scott under Mark when he talks about Kemp, make sure Scott delay a little bit of the USC fight song underneath.
It's you know what? I hate to say this, but it's actually a good fight song and music.
It is. I wish they would play it a little more at the game.
Yeah, they don't play it enough.
Yeah.
They run on the field. A guy takes a breath. They play it like every 10 seconds.
Yeah.
No, but you said that about Jay Buhner. That's who Steve Kemp, when the Yankees had him, they traded Tim Foley to the Pirates for 2 players and Jay Buhner, who eventually made his way to the Mariners, which did not make Frank Costanza happy.
It did not. It definitely did not. 19th hole, Bill.
Okay, this is from Thomas D. Craven. Oh, baby. Pat Jordan's article concerning the oh-so-cute Tim Foley was not very mature. The fact that he dated and married a Playboy bunny and discusses with her the merits of posing in the altogether is quite a bore. And then the swimsuit magazine needs to be gone. Oh, I added the last part.
What was his name?
Thomas D. Craven.
Man.
Thomas, not D. Craven women.
not the Playboy bunnies, that's for sure.
Sure not.
Yeah. Hey, I got nothing else. What about you guys?
I want to say one thing at the end. I didn't get to do my Jaws thing. With the Jaws in 75, that's the only movie I ever saw with my father. So I had when it came out, I'd never had fear of sharks because it always made me feel good. It's the only movie I ever saw with him.
Your dad
Wow.
gave you a fear of card sharks.
Yeah. Card sharks, bookies, guys like that. But sharks, I felt pretty good about it.
That's a nice memory, Billy. That's also 1975. What were you, 12?
Yeah.
That's a perfect time to take a child to one of the more horrific movies of all time.
It was either that or the Colorado Bar. So I'll take the movie. Or some of the other guys that used to
Did you
hang
get
around my dad.
popcorn at the movie?
What's
Did
that?
you get popcorn and
No, I
soda?
might have gotten something, but when my dad took you someplace, it was fun. We had a good time, but no, I probably got a popcorn and a soda and that. But
You
no,
got what you got, and you like.
When I was a kid, we had to walk 30 miles to get popcorn
That's right,
for
to
a
the
movie.
movie theater.
Yeah. So no, it was the only time. So I always had good memories of that.
Nice. That's a great way to wrap it up. Hey, everybody, enjoy the fireworks. Happy birthday, America. A year away from 250. You don't look a day over 245. Enjoy the 4th. Be smart. Be safe. Bill, Mark, and Scott, we thank you for listening. We are past our prime.